Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Summit Speakers Reunion Roundtable hosted by Speaking Your Brand. I'm Carol Cox, founder and CEO. I'm so excited to have all of our speakers here, as well as those of you who are watching, whether live or on the replay. Diane and I decided to put this together because we had such an incredible time hosting our Brave Bold Beyond live virtual summits. We held two of them, one in October of 2020, smack dab in the middle of the first year of the pandemic, where we were all doing so much virtually, but we really just wanted to bring together a group of women speakers since we couldn't be in person. And we had so much fun the first time around that we decided to do it again in April of 2021. And now, since it's been over a year since the last one, we decided to do this reunion to bring together some of the women who spoke so that they could share with you what it was like to create a 10-minute transformational, story-driven TED-style talk, how they decided what story they were going to share, how deep and vulnerable they had to get with their storytelling, which they all did an amazing job with that. And if they had any vulnerability hangovers after the fact, which is totally normal, I know I've had my share of those. They're also going to share with you some of the tips and things they learned from going through this process, as well as the speaking that they do in general. And of course, we want to take your questions. So in the chat, stay active in the chat. Let us know your comments. Let us know if you have questions. There's also a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window. So if you have a question for sure that you want to make sure that we see, go ahead and put it in the Q&A so that we see it. And the other thing is that on your chat, on the bottom of your chat window, there's an option to either send your chat to just us, the panelists, or to send the chat to everyone who's watching, all the attendees plus us, the panelists. It would be nice if you send the chat to all attendees plus the panelists. That way everyone watching can see the chat, and it makes it a little bit more interactive and fun for all of us. We also have some polls for you to take along the way because we like it to be interactive. So before we kick off with our first poll, let me introduce all of the lovely women that you see here. Of course, I'm Carol Cox, as I mentioned, founder and CEO of Speaking Your Brand. With me is Diane Diaz, our lead speaking coach, and also, of course, co-host for our summits and co-host for today. And then we have Amber Hawley, who was our MC for both of the summits that we did. She did an amazing job. And Amber also is a licensed counselor, mental health therapist. She has a podcast as well called The Easily Distracted Entrepreneur. As you're about to hear, many of the women here have a podcast, and actually have a question for them as we get towards the end of today, how having a podcast has helped them with their speaking and their storytelling. So we will do that as well. We also have here Dr. Zoe Shaw, who's a licensed psychotherapist and a life and relationship coach for women. She has a podcast called Stronger in the Difficult Places. Zoe was a speaker at our 2020 summit, and then we brought her back in 2021 to be a speaking coach to help some of our speakers get prepared, since she had the inside scoop since she was a speaker beforehand. Zoe also has several books that she's published and a memoir that she is working on. I can't wait to get an update on that. Dr. Bibi Parayesh spoke at our 2020 summit. She's an educational therapist and the founder of One Kids, which I would like to hear more about as we go on. Leanne Moss is a coach and consultant on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. She works with organizations on employee engagement through her company. Shalia Stafford spoke at our 2020 summit. She works on leadership development with organizations. Her podcast is called Flipping the Script, Leadership Beyond the Title. Jackie Roby is the founder of Inspired Journey Consulting. She works with travel agencies around seeing travel as a source of wellness for many people, for wellness, healing, and transformation. She has a podcast called Through Inspired Eyes. Dr. Karen Corbin is a scientist and the founder of Geeks That Speak. So she helps fellow scientists do a much better job with their presentations, whether it's academic conferences or other places that they are going. Katherine Johnson spoke at our 2021 summit. She's a certified life coach who helps women overcome frustration in their careers to have fulfilling lives. She has a podcast called Beautiful Conversations. And Joyce Spencer is also joining us. I think she'll be coming on camera in a little bit because she kind of has back-to-back meetings here. She's a storytelling expert. She was also one of our speaking coaches for both of our summits, and she has a podcast called Reframe to Create. So a lot of podcasters here. There's Joy. Hi, Joy. Nice to see you. And we also have several of the women here who graduated from our Thought Leader Academy, which I'll tell you about our Thought Leader Academy towards the end. We have Amber, BB, Shalia, Jackie, and Catherine, all graduated from our Thought Leader Academy. And then Karen Corbin and Joy Spencer have also worked with us one-on-one. So amazing for you all to be here. Thank you for taking the time today. Let me kick it off with this first question, and I'll call on you just to make it easier. Why did you decide to apply to speak at our summit, especially the very first one that we did in 2020 when you didn't know anything about it at all? Jackie, I'll start with you since I know you applied and to speak, and obviously we're selected. So what was it about, speaking at our summit, but also this idea of doing this 10-minute style talk?
So when I started my business, it was a goal of mine within the first 5 years. I really thought 5 years down the line, I was going to start speaking. And I had a TEDx talk on my list of things to do that I wanted to do. I had started listening to Speaking Your Brand for your podcast and became a super fan. So when the application came out, it was kind of, for me, a sign from the universe that it was time to get out there and tell my story.
All right. So Jackie, since you mentioned about telling your story, let me continue with you and ask you the next question, because you told a very personal and very vulnerable story really to kick off our 2020 summit. And I know that the women who were in the chat at the time live attending gave you and so many of the other women speakers so much love and support. But, why did you decide to share the story that you did? And what were you hoping to get out of it for yourself, but also for the audience?
I told the story of my first abuser, and a week before the application to speak came out, he died. And for me, that was a moment where I told my sister, I am going to use this story one day to help other women. It's going to be told in a larger way. So I knew in my heart that that was what I needed to speak about, as difficult as it was.
And okay, so we'll come back to you about any vulnerability concerns or vulnerability hangovers afterwards. So let me open it up to some of the other women about why they decided to apply to speak at our summit. Zoe, what about you? You also spoke at our first summit in 2020.
I did. And my journey was similar to Jackie's. The application call came at just kind of the perfect storm period in my life when I knew that I started kind of writing my memoir, and I was trying to figure out how am I going to segue or share my story on a bigger stage. I had already started speaking, but I wasn't speaking about my personal story of being a birth mother, giving my child up for adoption, the shame and ultimately forgiveness journey that I had to go on. And I know that is, not necessarily that specific story, but a similar shame story that many women have. And just like Jackie, I do strongly feel like it's my calling to help women in this area. And so when the application came up, I thought, well, there you go, Zoe, you don't have an excuse. This is a perfect time to try. And I decided, you know what, I'm just going to apply and see what happens. If it happens, then okay, I'm doing this. And if not, good, I'm off the hook for right now.
All right. Well, and you were not off the hook because and then we roped you in to be a speaking coach the next time around. So, all right. And we'll dive into your story specifics a little bit as well. So let me go to Karen. So Karen, I know you and I had worked together prior to the summit. We worked together in the VIP day to create your own signature talk. And so when the applications came through, what were your thoughts and what were you hoping to do with your message?
So much like Jackie, I've always had it on my list to learn the TED style in my speaking. And you might think that's weird because I'm a technical scientific speaker, but I feel very strongly that science needs stories so that people can understand it, can connect to it, can apply it. And when 2020 rolled around, I went from knowing this was important just from the sort of day-to-day, we need to find cures for diseases or we need to move things along. It went to a life or death thing where people were being misinformed and confused and making decisions that literally were costing lives. So I was sitting in my house in lockdown, screaming silently to myself all the time. And when I saw the application, I thought this is a good time for me to share my frustration and maybe people some ideas and tips on how do you navigate all this information. Information is no longer innovation. We have so much information at our fingertips that we have to provide information in a way that's compelling, that's fresh, that's understandable, and that allows people to be curious and to think and to make their own decision, not so much to tell people this is how it is, but give them that opportunity to figure it out on their own.
And we're going to get into how to connect your story into your big idea, because obviously that's an important part of doing a TED Talk or a TED style talk. Before we get into that, before I bring in some of the other women, I do have a couple of polls. Let me go ahead and put those up now so that we can have you all answer those. So the first one is, I would love to know, for those of you who are watching right now, did you attend our Brave Bold Beyond Live Virtual Summit, either one of them, either the one in 2020 or the one in 2021? And bonus points if you attended both. All right. So most of you know, yeah, it's been a little while. I know I have a lot of new people here who have joined the Speaking Your Brand community in the past year. So we did share a playlist, a YouTube playlist of the women who spoke that you see here and their summit speeches. So we'll share that again at the end of today's hour so that you can watch some of them if you would like to. Are we playing for prize or pride? Yeah. This is just going to be for your own benefit. All right. So yeah, bragging rights. Thanks, Diane. So that's the first poll. All right. So we have most people did not attend the summits. Well, they were amazing. All right. Let's do the next poll. So I would love to know from you all, do you want to do a TEDx talk? Is it high on your list? Have you already done one? Are you not sure? Like it intrigues you, but you're not quite sure. And then most likely not. So like, no, that's just not on your list. Oh, high on the list. Nice. All right. So we have almost 2/3 say it's high on the list. And then the rest of you about, I'm not sure. None of you are most likely not. Okay, great. Well, I would love to know in the chat. Tell me in the chat if you answered, I'm not sure. Let us know what's holding you back. What is it that's making you not sure about it? Let us know. All right. We'll come back to some more polls in just a little bit. Leanne, let me bring you in. So you started your summit speech with a scene. You dropped this into the story of an experience that had happened to you, and then you tied that into your big idea. Can you tell us a little bit about why you decided to choose that particular scene, that story, and then relate it to your bigger message?
Yeah, so I talked about conflict, and the scene that I sort of started with was about this text message exchange with one of my best friends in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. And to me, I wanted something that was going to make people like actually stop and listen. I know when I'm listening to people talk, even a summit with phenomenal women who are all speaking about really great things, sometimes you can get distracted. And so I really wanted people to make sure that people were like in the moment, and to try to get them to be almost in the moment with me, because that was a huge source of, I had a visceral reaction to that text message. And so when I started there, I knew that I had set up the scene to continue to be able to talk about conflict and talk about it in a practical way that hopefully people could relate to.
Yes, Leanne. And for those of you who are watching this right now, so this is the thing with storytelling in your talks, is that a lot of us are used to kind of telling anecdotes about stories, or kind of like broad descriptions of something that happened. But if you wanted have people, the audience, kind of come into your story, come into your talk, especially for a short talk like a 10-minute TEDx talk, you really have to be really good with your storytelling and drop us into the scene. Where were you at? What was going on? What did it look like? What was the dialogue going on, either between you and another person, that dialogue, that self-talk in your own head? In Leanne's example, she was receiving these text messages from her best friend. And so she was relaying that in her speech, what was actually going on. So it's not, and so there was this one day, and then I got these text messages from my friend, and then here's what I did. It's no, like, I looked at my phone and it was just going off, like ding, 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 ding. And I was looking. So you're actually, it's almost like you're describing a movie scene. You're a script writer, really, when you get down to thinking about your storytelling. Shalia, and speaking of openings, you had an incredibly powerful and really like heart-wrenching first couple of lines opening of your summit speech. Do you remember what it was?
I do. Yes. So I shared the scene that kind of solidified the spectrum of the leadership experience that I've had in life. I've been very blessed to experience leadership in the sense of corporate promotions and seeing other people flourish in their careers and being a part of a great team at work who is able to get together and cast a vision and go after it. But I've also experienced leadership at its worst. And that was when I had to make the 911 call that would not only go on to incarcerate my father, but deport him back to Mexico when I was 8 years old, when he attempted to kill my mother in front of me.
Yeah. And again, we're going to share the playlist of these women's summit speeches, and go listen to them, especially Shalia's, because your heart will drop. And you'll recognize how much bravery Shalia had at that age, at that very young age, 8 years old, but really how much bravery she's had throughout her whole life, including to share that on our virtual stage. And that's really what I want all of you to take away, is that your courage, that's why we call it the brave, bold, beyond. Your bravery and your boldness is what helps other women. What helps us to recognize we're not alone. We may not have had that same exact experience that Shalia had. We most likely haven't, but we've had something that has tested us, something that has tested, who we are, our sense of identity, our sense of belonging, our sense of who loves us, who's going to take care of us, whether it was when we're young or when we're older. And sharing those stories is what I believe connects us with each other in a deeper way, human to human. But then also, to Shalia's point, she works with leaders to help them develop their leadership. When you can be vulnerable like that, then I feel like it opens you up for even greater leadership. Catherine, speaking of leadership, you're a certified life coach and you help professional women with what they have going on. And you shared your story of when you were a teenager. What was it like, and why did you decide that story? And then how did you decide to connect that to your bigger message?
I shared that story because it had been a big part of my journey. I shared the story of when my voice was lost and how that showed it on my journey, in my career, in my relationships. And I connected it back to my coaching and what I do with women to really help them find their voice. It comes up a lot, whether they're finding their voice with learning how to express boundaries, or finding their voice in the workplace with learning how to show up. That story was really pivotal for me and helped me to really connect those dots and uncover my voice. And so I chose to share that story that I had never shared with anyone out loud publicly. I mean, I shared it with close friends and my therapist, but I had never shared that story out loud. So I chose to share that story because it had been such a monumental point of my growth and my journey, my transformation, my evolution as a person. It had been such a pivotal moment. So I thought that story was very appropriate, considering where I am now and the work that I do.
And Catherine, did you have any concerns leading up to about sharing that, since you hadn't shared it publicly before? And then did you have any vulnerability hangovers afterwards?
Once I made up my mind that was the story, I really didn't have any concerns. And surprisingly, I didn't have any vulnerability hangovers either, because I think I knew, like, in my heart that was the story that needed to be shared. Like, when I think about, like Joyce said, we all have lots of stories, but when I thought about, like, the story that had been the most impactful on my life and the story that could help others transform and help others for where they are so they don't feel like they're alone, that was the story that came to me immediately. So once I confirmed that and knew that was it, I didn't really have any doubts about it. Of course, I had some fears because, again, I had never shared it before. So of course you're wondering, how it will be received, what will people think. But once I settled on the fact that this was the story, I was able to just use the courage and allow that to push me, knowing that I was going to support someone and help someone for where they are in their journey.
Absolutely. All right, Bibi, let me bring you in. So you shared a story from your childhood that connects to what you do now in your profession as an educational therapist. And I believe that when you started working on your talk, you weren't quite sure what story you were going to use to connect to your bigger message. And also tell us a little bit about, growing up in Iran, coming to the US, you had a lot of things to connect, right? Into that. So what was your approach to doing so? What were you hoping to achieve with that?
I mean, to be honest, for me, especially because we'd worked together before and I had, done different talks that were kind of academic and I come from that academic background. and I was surrounded by all these amazing women who, even though it's difficult, were much more comfortable being vulnerable than I think I was. For me, the opportunity to do this 10-minute talk was actually really about finding what my emotional message was, because I felt like, okay, I know how to do a talk. I know it's, the academic part, the informational part, but even for myself personally, I mean, it was almost like therapy. Like, it was a question for myself. What is my personal connection to this work that I do? I know that it was there, but I wasn't quite connected to it. And I was very surprised by the stories that came up from my childhood in Iran, and my experiences kind of living through war and the revolution, and then the connection between my work today and my relationship with my dad. None of those were things that I really expected to connect. And somehow, like, having this very short talk forced me to have to get to the heart of the matter, and kind of get to the emotional piece, and not just kind of like all the knowledge that you can give in an informational talk. So I think that's what really it was about for me.
And how many of you here, the panelists, can relate to it feeling a little bit like therapy to go through this process of creating, right, this 10-minute talk, right? It feels, because it is like, it's 10 minutes feels like, oh, well, how much can you really do in 10 minutes? But you can do a lot in 10 minutes, as you all saw with your summit speeches. So let me now ask you all, how did the guidance and coaching you received from us? So we had our speaking coaches who helped you all prepare your speeches. I guess, let me ask you first, what was your biggest challenge when you sat down to think about how to create this talk? And then what did your coach, how did your coach steer you or help you in the most effective way for you? Let me go, who wants to take that? And raise your hand. Okay, let's go Catherine and then Jackie.
I feel like for me, it's because I'm such an analytical person. Like, I wrote it analytically and how I thought it should sound and what I thought it should sound like. So when we got on the call with Joy, she's asked me a bunch of very targeted questions, like, is that how you would speak it if you were talking to someone? Is that the language you would use? Is that the words you would use? That really helped me to get out of my head with it and really make it more personal and make it my voice, because that was the most important part of it. Like, it needed to be my voice. It needed to sound like me. It was my story. So I think without that coaching, it would have sounded very analytical, left brain me, maybe polished and perfect, but my voice would have been lost, and the meaning behind what I was hoping to achieve would have been lost.
All right. So for those of you watching, put in the chat if you're a left brain analytical thinker like Catherine and like me. For sure, I definitely am. Let us know in the chat if that's your go-to as well. And thank you for sharing that, Catherine. That is such a great point about making our speeches more conversational, because so many times we do start by writing them out, but our writing voice is very different than our conversational speaking voice. Oh, we got lots of left brain people in the chat. Awesome. All right. All right, Jackie, what about you? What was your biggest challenge when you sat down to create your talk, and then what helped you?
So when I first started, I remember thinking, I need to teach something. And what lesson am I going to give from this? And so my first draft was really focused around that. And while I had storytelling in it, I was so concerned about, again, what can they walk away with? And my coach came to me and said, no, your voice is what matters here. And as we talk about this feeling very therapeutic, being a survivor of abuse and trauma in any form, your voice is silenced for so long, and you're led to believe that it doesn't matter at all. So just the idea of bringing this to the forefront and speaking about how healing is an incredibly important part of our journey, and using our voices to do that, that was such a gift.
Thank you, Jackie. Yeah. So let us know in the chat for those of you who can relate to this idea of feeling like in your talks, whether it's a 10-minute talk or 45-minute keynote, that you feel like, oh, I just need to give them lots of teaching information. Like I just need to make sure that there's so much value, so many lessons in what I'm sharing. Let us know in the chat. Just put me in the chat if that's something that you feel like when you sit down and work on your talks, you're like, okay, what is all the information that I can convey to them and as much as possible? Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Jackie.
One more thing.
Yeah.
I also had Dr. Karen, Dr. Zoe, Dr. Bibi, all in the summit. So I have a million doctors and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I don't want to sound dumb. So how am I going to stand, next to these women and speak?
Oh, Jackie, well, you certainly did not. So rest assured on that. We do have a lot of doctors as clients, which I appreciate. It's all the left brain women who appreciate our structure too. All right. So Zoe, let me bring you in. So you spoke at our 2020 summit and then you were a speaking coach for 2021. What was your biggest challenge when you sat down to work on your talk? And then what helped you? And then how did you help the speakers that you ended up coaching?
So I'm more actually of a right-brained person. And so I'm like all emotion and I want to share the whole story and I want to put everything in there and I want to make sure they really hear me and understand me. And that was, I think, my challenge. And so my coaches, even you, Carol, in looking through my speech, were like, yeah, we don't really need that. And you can take that out and the story still stands. So my biggest challenge was figuring out, and also, I had what I felt like this big story. How do I take something that could be 100,000 words and bring it down into just 10 minutes? And so the coaching was just really helpful. And you talked about, I think, the tree, right? And just kind of narrowing it down, finding that one strand and attaching everything and making sure everything attaches to that one strand. That was really helpful. And so when I was invited to be a coach, which was a wonderful experience, I think that what I brought to coaching was, number one, having been through it already and being able to both settle, I think, the speakers' minds and talking to them just about the experience because they wanted to know a lot about the experience, and also helping them do the same thing, hone in their story to make sure that their voice is coming across, but also every single word, sentence that they put in the story is going back to and supporting that main topic that they want to share.
Yes. Thank you for mentioning that, Zoe. So the tree that Zoe just mentioned is that in our Thought Leader Academy, what I explained to our clients in one of our training sessions is that you have so many ideas, so many stories, so many lessons, and that's like an oak tree, right? So branch upon branch upon branch upon branch, and it can just keep going and going, all of the things, the content that you could include in your talk. But instead of thinking of an oak tree, I want you to all think of a palm tree. So I live in Florida, so I see lots of palm trees. Palm trees have one central trunk. It's very strong. And then they have some branches along the top, but it's not branch after branch after branch after branch. So when you're thinking about your talks, whether it's a 10-minute TEDx talk or a 45-minute keynote or a lead generation presentation, your through line is that trunk. And then everything you talk about has to hang off of that through line, that trunk, not here over here and here over here. And Diane and I and the other coaches, we love to cut content because it is not sacred to us. Like we'll cut. And you can save that for a book, which Zoe is writing her memoir. So you can save all that extra content for a book or other things that you want to use it for. But why TED Talks became so popular is because they're so focused on that one idea and that central story that's going to connect to it. All right, we have a couple more polls. Let me bring those in. And then I'm going to bring in Joy and Diane to talk a little bit about their experience as coaches. All right, let me do this. Next one is, for those of you watching, let us know in the poll, do you know a key story that you would share in your talk, whether it's a TEDx talk, keynote, etc.? Yes, you have a key story. You may have a few stories trying to decide which one, or you're not sure what your key story would be. Yes, we are recording this session. All right, so we have, it's a good mix. Most of you say that you have a few stories trying to decide. And then about the other half and half, yes, you know your key story, or you don't, you have no idea. All right, well, keep thinking about it, and one of the best ways I know of to think of through stories is to grab someone that you know, start talking through things, You can write them out. You can do podcast interviews. Those things tend to help. All right, let me do the next poll. All right, so he related to your key story. What's your biggest challenge when thinking about telling your story? So identifying the best story, making the story relevant to the audience, connecting your story to the bigger message, or how much detail or not to share in your story. What's the biggest challenge when you think about it right now? So about, let's see, it looks like either identifying the best story or connecting your story to your bigger message tends to be the two that were answered in the top. All right, great. Thank you for sharing that. End the polls there. So Joy, let me bring you in. So Joy, you were a speaking coach for both of our summits. You helped our speakers cut to make their stories stronger with the storytelling. What is your approach when you sit down to look at a talk, a speech, a first draft of a speech? Where do you start with?
So I'm very much an emotional coach in the sense that I'm paying attention to how I'm emotionally connecting to what the person is sharing, because I know that at the end of the day, that's the power of a story. So I very much feel into what I'm hearing, and I let people know very quickly if I'm disconnected, if I'm tapped out, and I'm not a big data person. So I'm always like, I want to hear about the numbers, give me the juicy stuff, give me the emotions. So that's very much my focus. I very much lean into the emotional part of a story and helping to pull that out of folks. And then it's about helping them to be emotionally connected to what they're sharing as well, because people can get into their heads. They're thinking about, I want to make sure this is a good story. I want to make sure it has a big impact on folks. I want to make sure that people change their lives. You have no control over any of that. What you do have control over is making sure that when you're retelling your story, you're doing show, and that you're connected to the emotions and you're connected to the taste, the sounds, the smells, so that other people can connect and enter into the story with you. So that's where my focus really is in the beginning, helping people get out of their heads back into their emotions and letting them know that, the power of your story isn't your idea about how amazing and phenomenal and life-changing it is, but just as how you can get reconnected to it that will allow others to connect to it as well.
For those of you here, the panelists, our speakers, how many of you, when you shared your story at our summit, still felt it? Like you felt it either in your heart or in your body when you were reciting it? Yeah. Yeah, I know. When I share my stories, I feel this. I still feel it. Like it will choke me up a little bit sometimes, even though these experiences happened 15 years ago, 20, 25 years ago. And so, Shalia, you raised your hand that you definitely still felt it. And I know that for a lot of women who are watching this right now, the question they may have in their mind is, well, what if I feel too emotional about it? Or what if I kind of like get choked up about it as I'm telling it? Have you ever had that experience, or any advice that you would suggest?
Yeah, so I try to think about the person that I have an opportunity to impact. I know for me growing up, and part of what is my story, not just from my childhood, but current day, it was to break the cycle and to forge a new path, not just for those in my family, but everybody that I get an opportunity to surround myself with, and to look for the experiences that are going to serve my growth, even if they feel awkward, even if they make my heart pound, my palms sweat, and make me feel like I'm not ready, experienced enough, or whatever it is that I may come up with in my head to get me to not step into the courage of bringing my story to life. What has fueled my ability to stay focused on that message throughout my journey has been the people throughout my life who have shared the rawness of their stories that made me find myself in others and my experiences growing up and breaking the cycle. And even till today, today, it's easy to look at my story and see the Pinterest version of it, but the reality is a whole nother spectrum, right? And so I try to remember that there were others who illuminated my path and impacted my path through the rawness of being a human, the imperfect, raw, and vulnerable aspects of it. And I want to give back to the world in that way and stay true to that message.
Thank you, Shalia. All All right, let me bring in Diane. So of course, Diane's our lead speaking coach at Speaking Your Brand. And Diane also did speeches at both summits, as did I, because of course, we're not going to like let ourselves off the hook. We had to create our own too and deliver it. So Diane, share a little bit about, especially the speech that you gave talking about when you were 5 years old and what it felt like to share that story. And then I'll follow up with a question about being a coach.
Yeah. And so the story that I shared about when I was 5 was about how I envisioned and could see, like I was back in that scene, right? I was 5 years old and I saw there was some kind of a birthday party going on. Not exactly sure who it was for, but all the balloons and all the fun things, but also juxtaposed to that, my mother crawling on her hands and knees across the floor to try to get outside because she was hyperventilating because my father is a belligerent alcoholic. And so he, wreaked terror on us. And so that idea of, not having a voice at that time, because I was 5, who really has a voice and say in their circumstances when they're 5, and that, how that felt and, kind of why I speak and why I help other women have a voice is because that's kind of my memory of not having a voice and how trapped you feel when you're in that situation.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Diane. That was a very powerful speech that you delivered. Now, of course, you're one of, you're our coach here and you work with our clients at the summits, but of course you work with our clients in the Thought Leader Academy and in VIP days to create their talks. When you sit down and look at someone's speech that they've already started on, so like, especially for these summit speeches, these 10-minute ones, what are you looking for as you go through it?
Yes. And so but similar to Joy, I am looking for the story, of course, like, is there a personal story coming into it? And are they leading with the story? Are they leading with the heart of the story and the emotional connection? But I'm also looking for beyond just what they have kind of crafted as their outline of their story, their confidence in telling the story, because I know that it's hard to tell personal stories like that. And somebody had commented to one of the questions is that we don't often feel like we have a strong enough story. So is the story strong enough, or maybe they're holding back a little bit because they don't feel like it's that powerful. And so maybe the story is more superficial. So can we go a little bit deeper to really get to the heart of what that story is about? And I think that really speaks to that idea that we think, it's just my story. It's really not going to impact anyone. But I don't think you have to inspire everyone in the audience. You really just have to inspire one person. So if you just think about that one person you can inspire and talk to that one person, then you can go deeper in the story. So I kind of look for, are they going deep enough in the story? And are they really tapping into the emotion behind it versus just telling superficial bits and pieces that kind of gloss over it?
Yes. Yeah. The more specific in your storytelling, the better that it is for the audience. So Karen, let me go to you. So you're a scientist. And so, you definitely are good on, the information and the data and analyzing and all of that. And so what was your biggest challenge when you sat down to create this talk for our summit?
Yeah, so very much like Catherine, when I get a set of instructions, like you have this much time and it should be this structure and this many words, I'm going to deliver that like boom, boom, boom. And so that really inhibited my ability to be more personable and connect more with the audience. And I had Jamie as a coach, and then I bothered all y'all. So Joy, Diane, Carol, I was like, you guys, this is not good enough. This is not good. And it was literally the night before, and you had open office hours, and I said, I need to practice. And it was you, Carol. You're like, well, it was good, but it's still just, too much this precisely devised, presentation. You need to connect more. And so literally version 13 was the night before, and I just found a way to get there, terrified as I was. And you might think these things aren't useful for people in the audience who may be delivering more data-driven or technical talks, but it is, because who wants to hear a data dump? It's ineffective and it's uninspiring, and you're going to forget all of it when you leave the room. So there are a lot of ways to connect with people with all kinds of talks, and that's what helped me kind of get to the strongest story I think I was able to come up with in that time period where you guys were helping me.
And we even had you call back to your days as a little girl in Puerto Rico.
I did, those were good times and times that people don't really think I went through because they don't look at me and think that, I might be an underrepresented woman in STEM. So it is good for, and I use it a lot with my kids, when I talk to kids about science, like, hey, I'm one of you guys. I'm not the Harvard, rich person. And people can be like, oh, I can do that too. So I think it really is important to bring your life story into it, which is definitely not something they teach you in science school.
Except now they will with Geeks That Speak.
That's right.
Well, and Karen makes up a good point, brings up a good point, is that for those of you who are watching, and if you struggle to think about what's the story, like what's your key story, what's the story that you could share, it doesn't have to be a big T traumatic story. Now, some of us may have those big T traumatic stories from our childhood or even in adulthood. And so that could be your story, but you may just have something, it could be a little T traumatic story. So something like I shared the story in my talks about this professional backlash that I received 15 years ago when I was in local politics. So that I don't consider that a big T traumatic story, but it still impacted me professionally and personally. And it could just be a series of things that have shaped who you are, to shaped who you've become and what matters to you. So think about those things as you start kind of playing around with what your stories could be. All right, let me bring Amber Hawley in. So Amber was our MC, and so she had a front row, or should I say behind the scenes seat to everything that was going on as we prepared for both of the summits and then as she emceed it. So Amber, I would love to hear from your perspective. You saw the chat going off with the women who were watching the summits and of course all of our speakers. What were your biggest takeaways as far as the speech making was concerned?
I mean, there were quite a few. I do think, like you said, I was through the whole process. Like in the first summit, I even was one of the people that helped pick the speakers. So I feel like it was so helpful to see even the way we like talked about and looked at what was compelling about this talk and why people would be chosen. And then all the way through, I think there was a universal theme of this, like, is this good enough? Is this, like I'm being vulnerable, but is this helpful to people? And then seeing them in the journey of coming to that place of understanding and having such clarity around their message. But like you're saying, that balance of showing up and delivering a great speech. So there's the logistics of that, but then there was the emotional piece of actually connecting to people and making a difference for people. And that, I mean, just across the board in both summits, that was I think everything that was said was just how powerful and moving it was. Like, I don't think there was a dry eye in the whole place. Like, it was very hard to, be the interlude entertainment and like not be in a crying space. But it was, I just think it was really great to see when you can bring in the technical ability of putting together a really powerful talk, but it's the human emotional piece that makes it sing, right?
Very well said, Amber. And for all of our speakers, if you can make your audience laugh and cry and feel, in person is one thing because you just literally have the human to human dynamic of being in person. But when you can do that through a virtual screen, I mean, that's incredible because it's harder to do virtually when we're all on our screens, but you all did that. We were crying, we were laughing. I mean, it was the full realm of emotions. Let me bring in Leanne now, and then I'm going to go to BB. Leanne, so we've been talking a little bit about this idea of the storytelling and the emotional heart of a story and thinking more about like, what is that bigger transformation you want your audience to take away versus a lot of information or a lot of data or analysis. And so obviously you do work on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So there's lots of data, right? Lots of research around that. So how did doing this talk, this style of talk, change the way you saw yourself as a speaker and as a presenter, if it did?
It absolutely did. And one of the things that I have since told folks is that I felt like for me delivering that talk and not even just writing it, but actually delivering it to an audience has helped me tremendously because it definitely gave me the confidence to talk about something that I did not want to talk about. Like, I don't share a ton of personal stuff. I personally don't like conflict, and I don't think anyone does. But talking about it and talking about how important it was to engage in conflict and how, hey, this is uncomfortable for everyone, but we still have to do it to get to the other side, has really transformed a lot of how I approach different things with, individuals, and also when I'm talking to organizations. No one really wants to talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. Like, it's kind of like this uncomfortable elephant in the room that is there, but we're all going to peek and hide and pretend it doesn't exist. And maybe if we hear the elephant like stomping around, we'll maybe then get to it. But so all of that to say, I really think it's helped me to kind of cut across the BS. Because I think that is where the transformation happens, is when we all stop tiptoeing around trying to be polite, super perfect people, and really cut through all of the, superfluous stuff and really get to the heart of what matters. Doesn't matter that my employee is engaged, or, doesn't matter that my employee is having a bad experience, or why does this matter, that we have certain races and ages and all sorts of things represented within our company. Getting to the heart of that has really been, I think, transformational for everyone involved, but also I think to be able to put that to words and deliver that in the summit was open. It definitely opened a lot of doors for me and my comfort level, and being able to articulate that to other folks.
Oh, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you for sharing. All right, BB. So you mentioned a little bit ago that definitely, like, thinking about your own personal stories and growing up was something that you hadn't done a lot about, because you come from this academic background and used to these academic type of presentations. So since the summit, and since you've been through our Thought Leader Academy, how have you kind of seen this transformational piece of your presentations with this podcast interviews and so on versus just kind of the academic information? How have you integrated that?
Yeah, so I think, a few people have mentioned this. I think for me, the biggest transformational piece in all of the work that I've done with you guys is that I just kept thinking that I had to have like some big, amazing breakthrough or message or something. And what I learned actually is that all of the power is in just revealing who you are. And I was really surprised by that. I honestly was. I think that for a lot of us, we hesitate to step onto bigger stages because we think we're supposed to achieve something or do something. And we don't live in a culture that teaches us that, no, it's actually about just getting to know yourself and just sharing that with others more. So I think that's what was really transformational for me. And it's impacted me in every aspect of my life. It's impacted me in my personal relationships. It's impacted me in my work with students and families. And then, kind of more career related, it's finally given me the courage to start doing more personal writing. But still under the academics or professional doesn't have to exclude the personal. In fact, it's when it includes the personal that it becomes really powerful. And that's what I really learned from you.
Oh, well, fantastic. And as when you went through the Thought Leader Academy, I believe one of the things that you worked on was creating an initiative around your idea. And that's where One of One Kids was born. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes. So the initiative, it's under that umbrella, but it's called the Difference is Not Deficit Project. And it's essentially, piggybacking off of what you do, which is the idea of getting people to share stories. One of the things that I learned, especially in the pandemic, was that so many of us are feeling so isolated. So many students were feeling very isolated in their experiences with their schooling, especially kids who have learning differences. And, being able to talk about that and being able to share that is the biggest part of the battle. So that's really what the initiative is about. It's about getting people, not just students, families, therapists, teachers, etc., to share their stories of what it feels like when you don't fit or when the system doesn't work for you. So that's what that initiative is on.
Well, congrats. I love to see it. All right. We have about 10 minutes left. So if those of you watching, let us know if you have questions in the chat and we'll bring those up. And so this idea of having a container for your thought leadership is especially helpful if you do want to do more speaking, especially keynote speaking, and you want to get those speaking invitations and you want to up level your speaking. So bigger stages, get paid to speak, higher fees, and so on. So one of the things that the women do in the Thought Leader Academy is identify what their container is going to be. Could be an initiative like BB described, could be a podcast, could be a LinkedIn live show, could be a video series, could be an event, and so on. And so I know Jackie launched a podcast from the Thought Leader Academy. Catherine did as well. Shalia has had a podcast, but I think she kind of, I think I encouraged her to do a solo series on the podcast after she did lots and lots of guest interviews. Joy worked with us one-on-one, but then she also launched her a podcast as well. So let me ask the podcasters, how has having your own podcast, especially if you do solo episodes, helped you as a speaker, as a storyteller, and has it helped you to be more vulnerable with your storytelling or to find other ways to express your ideas? Jackie, I'll start with you.
Yes. So personally, I'm somebody who's pretty great at being vulnerable. So that's one of maybe my strengths, superpowers. But what I think was really interesting was putting it into a podcast format and bringing other people into the conversation as well as that solo storytelling. What it's really transformed for me between the podcast, the Travel Can Heal initiative, and speaking, first at Brave Bold Beyond and from then on, is my position in the market and what that looks like in terms of being a thought leader overall. And people that have known me, either worked with me side by side or have been friends with me for 15, 20 years, saw these talks, listened to the podcast and said, wow, I had no idea. And it changed their perception in a really incredible way. It also opens tons of doors in terms of business. And what I've noticed is that space of vulnerability. I don't coach. I work as a consultant in, sales and marketing with wellness and healing travel. But what it's shown clients is that I'm real. I understand the depth of what wellness and healing travel look like, the importance of it, and that I'm somebody that they can trust and that will understand and listen.
Yes. Thank you, Jackie. And you've had success with that. I know you've had some PR, some publicity, some recognition, and some international speaking engagements as well.
Yes, I have. I was invited to be a hosted speaker at T-Fest, which is Travel Fest in Dubai last year. I've been invited to go back again this year and to also speak at the retreat show in Ibiza, as well as the Wellness Tourism Association conference.
Well, fun. That's great. All right. Congrats on that. Now, Zoe and Amber, as you went through our programs, you did a kind of podcast rebrand where you changed the name of your podcast, both of you, and kind of the direction of it. Zoe, can you tell us a little bit about what prompted that? And then I also wanted you to tell the audience about your memoir.
Yeah, I already had my podcast before I spoke at the summit, but sharing my story and being more vulnerable actually prompted me to do more of that. And I actually shared my speech on my podcast, and that, brought about a lot of conversation with my listeners, and they wanted more. And so I was prompted to just go a little deeper and go more into really the brokenness that women feel in difficult relationships with themselves and others. And so I did rebrand my podcast, and I also brought in a little bit of faith, which is more authentic to me, and feminism, which is also more authentic to me. And so I rebranded about a year ago, and it's been really well. It's gone really well. And so out of my speech, of course, my memoir continued to grow. And at the second summit, when I did a breakout room, I met Tiffany Hawk, who was there. And she actually helped me craft my proposal. And I got an agent. And so we are in the process of subbing the memoir now, which is becoming kind of more of a self-help memoir.
Ooh, exciting. So Tiffany Hawk is also my book coach. She's been helping me with my book proposal. She was on the Speaking Your Brand podcast late last year, I think December of 2021. So definitely, if you're any of you watching, you want to do a book proposal, definitely check out Tiffany. She's great. All right. We have a couple of questions in the chat. So let me get from that. So Terry and then Lauren echoed Terry's questions. Terry's question is, what are the best, most successful, lucrative ways for prospecting and finding organizations to send proposals to and to find places to speak? Anyone want to share what has been worked well for them?
I don't know if I can share necessarily like where to go, but for me, it's been a practice. So I've committed to pitching at least one place per week. And that's simple and it's easy. And every Friday I pitch somewhere. And it's been helpful for me because I've had places that I pitched a year ago and they didn't accept me to be in the conference, and then have come back a year later and said, hey, can you be in this next one? So I just kind of wash and repeat, and I do research on places that I think would work really well with my brand, that speak to the same things that I speak to. And I just pitch.
Great. Yeah. The commitment, the consistency,
right.
And the commitment.
Yeah.
Good. Yes. And keep doing, like, all these women said yes to applying to our summit. And so for those of you who are watching, even if you think something maybe is out of reach, like, oh, they would never pick me or something, just go ahead. Just doing the speaking proposal can be super helpful for clarifying your ideas too. Anyone else have something to add about prospecting or submitting speaking proposals?
I'll add something.
Yeah, go ahead, Shalia.
So I think similar to what Zoe said, is committing to reaching out to prospects at a consistent rate. For me, it's also been once a week, but I also think following other speakers who have a similar message as you. And I have a OneNote that I continuously update for speakers who are similar to my message, who speak at large conferences. And if I see they're speaking there, I'm adding it to my pitch list so that I can grow my pipeline, and also doing cold pitches on LinkedIn.
Oh, great idea. Thank you, Shalia. We're all like, yes, that's a great idea. So smart. All right. We have a question from Monica Pierre. She asked, have you found it beneficial to start with the big idea and then find a story that supports that through line? Or is it your story first and develop a big idea around that? Thoughts on that?
I can add something to that.
Joey.
I've done both. So I've done storytelling work in different groups, and I've done work to help, speakers incorporate storytelling into their work. It just sort of depends on what type of talk you've come to. So if you are being invited to give a talk, and you have your idea, and you formulate your idea, the question that you would ask is sort of like, well, why is this important to me? Because there's some sort of passion around it. What's my personal connection to this? And then you do some digging around that and can pull personal stories of your own, or even stories that you've heard or in society, et cetera. So you can go that direction, or you might just, depending on what you're doing, you might be engaged in a storytelling activity. And so it's like, then from that direction, it's like, here's the story. Then it's, what's the universal theme that I'm pulling out of it? What are the lessons that I'm learning from this, and why is this potentially important to the world and to others, and what I've learned and what I can share. So it's not a one size fits all. There's possibility in going each direction. It just depends on what you're being asked to do. And it's a willingness to explore and go deeper and ask those questions that are going to really get to what's your personal connection to this? Why has this got you fired up? Or what does this have you, what does this story get you fired up about?
Thank you, Joy. I've also found the same. Sometimes it is the idea first, sometimes it's the story first. And one thing that we work on both in the Thought Leader Academy and our advanced program Catalyst is that you could have that one key story. Like I had that story of my involvement in local politics, but I will change the lesson by emphasizing certain aspects of the story over other aspects. So the story is still the same. It's still my story. It's a true story. It's what happened, but I could decide to talk about losing my voice. I could decide to talk about being a woman with a public voice and a public presence. So I can change the emphasis depending on the big idea, the lesson that I want to draw from that particular story. So that's also something that you can do. Okay, Sudha has a question, then we're going to wrap up. Share an example of a speech proposal. So that's a little bit of a longer thing. So there are resources online for sure. And then if you're in the Thought Leader Academy, you definitely work on your speaking proposals with our templates. Leanne, she has a story bank of moments that have been transformative for me. Yes, super helpful to create that story bank as well. Well, I want to thank all of you panelists for taking the time to be here today with us. I so enjoyed this reunion. Like I said, when we started, it feels like a high school or college reunion, but one you actually want to go to and you're excited to see everyone else. So thank you for being here. You all are incredible. I'm going to send out a follow-up email to everyone who was attending today so that you can connect with these women and watch their videos on the YouTube playlist. Make sure to find their podcasts as well and to check them out. Thank you again for all the amazing work that you do and for using your voice and telling the stories that need to be told. Thank you so much.